Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 24th episode of the Unity or Death podcast. Definitely apologize for last week and my guest disappearing on me. We still haven't heard from him, so I hope he's okay. Seeming he was planning a bunch of protests and he kind of vanished from the internet, which is kind of fitting, seeming the topic we have today, because I'm really excited for today's show because I have someone that I'm bringing on today that a lot of people haven't heard of, but I consider his story and what's going on right now extremely relevant. And what's happening to him is almost this weird fusion of Daniel Hale and Julian Assange, but it's still ongoing and he's still free now and he's still talking and fighting today in the public, giving interviews. So I think this is really important to get ahead of things like this and talk to people like this and spread this information. So with great honor and much respect, I welcome on Mr. David McBride. How are you doing, sir?
Good, thanks, Magnus. Great to be on the show.
Yeah, so we had a conversation about this of when I announced this show. A lot of my followers, which are kind of a mix of the American left and libertarians and sort of, the political distances of all flavors, they were very aware of the Assange case, but they'd never even heard of your name, which was always kind of curious to me. So we could start off real quick with kind of just a background of your service history and kind of who you are and who you were before everything kind of went crazy with what's happening right now.
Yeah, I'm a logical extension of the sort of Assange wave, I guess. And you're right to say I'm more like Daniel Hale or even Chelsea Manning in that I was a uniformed soldier. I think that the uniqueness of my case is that unlike Assange, and maybe I'm even a step sort of further towards the establishment than Snowden, I was a military officer with a very much an establishment background. I went to law school in Australia. I went to Oxford University in the UK. I joined the British Army as an officer, and I went to Sandhurst, the British equivalent of West Point, and I was very much in the establishment. I then came back to Australia. I was a lawyer in Australia, and I became a military lawyer, which was a great combination for me. It was half lawyer, half soldier, and I did 2 deployments to Afghanistan as a military lawyer. It's a Major David McBride. That's where my rank. So I was a middle manager. I was concerned with the law. I taught people rules of engagement. And I began to see that things weren't what we said they were. And I think that that's the central claim about me. I'm not an anti-war activist. I do believe the Defence Forces do a good job. They are important. But we need to not bullshit. And I began to see we were bullshitting a lot. We had got carried away with the idea of PR. The public relations people had taken over the military. And now it was no longer a matter of trying to win the war or doing a good job, or we were just making shit up all the time. We were losing the war and we were saying we were winning. And this annoyed me as a professional soldier, because you're obviously not going to win any kind of struggle, whether it's a football game or a corporation, if you pretend the bad things aren't happening and you keep on making the same mistakes over again. And I began to suspect that it was a bit like the military action in Afghanistan was really like a giant military version of the corporation Enron, in that we were just making good news stories up. That was the whole point. It became highly politicized. I first saw it in relation to war crimes, in that some of our so-called heroes were actually just murderers, and we knew that, and yet because they were too big to fail, we just they had the old tactic that we give them a few more medals and we give them more limelight, no one will ever suspect. But we did it the opposite way as well. I'm not anti-soldier. We sometimes threw good soldiers to the wolves because political expediency wanted it. In fact, that's the very first time I came across corruption. Was actually we were sacrificing good soldiers who'd actually done their job because the politics. We needed some scapegoats. We found some special forces soldiers, and we were going to chuck them in jail, even though they'd just done their jobs. And I complained about it, and I was told to sort of shut up. And I knew something was wrong at that moment. And the more I looked into it, I found that the heroes weren't heroes. I found that our allies were often, drug dealing, pedophiles. It became such a can of worms, and it's because at the heart of it, we no longer valued the truth. The idea was you just make shit up. We just say this guy's a hero, say this guy's a villain, do whatever it takes in the public affairs scheme in order to win. I couldn't get any. Of course, I was effectively complaining about the very top of the organisation, and of course the Australians were just following the Americans. So I was really complaining about the White House. So I obviously didn't get much traction, although I did complain internally. And if they'd been prepared to meet me at any stage, and I imagine quite a few of you have found this, who have been involved in opposing the sort of government narrative, and if they'd come to me and said, okay, it was a war and we may have overstepped the mark with that sort of propaganda device or whatever, I would have been happy if they, but of course they don't take a backward step. If you question the government narrative, if you question, they come down on you hard. They come down on the whistleblowers. And so my career tanked. I became investigated internally. I could see it was a big problem. It's a problem that affects every kind of area we're governed by, in that we are no longer hearing the truth, and anybody who dissents risks jail. I went to the media. It wasn't easy getting media on side, and that's another thing that people will find interesting. I mean, you could have a very big scandal story, but getting someone to run it is no longer that easy. I think Chelsea Manning had the same problem. She wrote to the New York Times or whatever, and they didn't want to take the story, and Assange did. So eventually I went to a couple of media outlets, but one of them ran it. Not quite the story that I wanted, because I wanted to really aim at the generals. I was saying this is a big problem, and it starts at the top, and we are lying to the Australian public. The Americans are lying to their public, and it's not an accident. It's not a one-off. We have become a sort of dystopian world. In fact, if we're not the bad guys of the world, we're getting pretty close. And but they did run the bad soldiers. They did run the war crimes, and so I got some traction. Then the police raided my house. I had to run off to Spain when I knew extradition would be hard. That was a problem. I had got 2 children, and they were in Australia. And eventually I came back knowing I would get arrested, but wanting to face the music, because my attitude, I got arrested at the airport at gunpoint. And for the last 3 years, I've been on trial. It keeps getting extended, sometimes because of the government, sometimes because of us. There's
an important question I have for you is have they placed you under any kind of restrictions like they do other whistleblowers, like house arrest, being banned from the internet or anything like that? Or have they kind of let you more
They've
or less
been pretty good that way. I would be under constant surveillance, and the Australian security services will be watching this program. Hello, guys. Yeah, I'd be monitored. One of the conditions of my bail was that every time I get a mobile phone, I've got to give the police the number. So I guess that's so they monitor. But they have been pretty good. I don't actually have a problem with the police, and I've always said this all along. I've said that, if I've committed a crime, I'll happily go to jail. I'm a lawyer. I'm a military officer. I believe I was justified. In fact, I believe it was my duty to do something about what I saw. A government had been carjacked, is what I like. There's nothing wrong with the military per se, but the people at the top were running it for sort of selfish political purposes, and I needed to do something about it. It was actually my duty to do something about it.
And I think that's a really important detail of your story that kind of, like you said before, sets you apart a little bit from like Manning and Snowden and Daniel Hale and stuff like that. You were a high-ranking member of the military, and if I'm correct, because I'm pretty sure you tried every single thing and talked to every single person you could within the military, within the command structure, to kind of correct this long before going to the press. And I think when people try to slander whistleblowers as like traitors or spies or anything like that, that particularly rings hollow in you, because you tried to talk to anybody you could within your job to fix this problem, and you were ignored or bullied or investigated.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. I first had concerns in 2011. I didn't do much in 2011 because I didn't have what they call standing, in that I could see we covered up a terrible murder of like 5 children. But it wasn't my case. I was just concerned about it. And I also could see we were lying about the progress of the war. We were putting out these glossy PowerPoint messages that said nothing. And they were all bullshit, but the generals loved it, and the politicians loved it. Oh, it looks like we're making progress when we weren't. 2013, I did something. 2013, I started to agitate within the organisation, but to say, we are breaking the law routinely. We are lying. We are covering up murders. We are, try and just diplomatically as I could. I was a middle-ranking officer, I certainly, the military was a job I loved, and I wasn't going to throw it out the window. So I said, I ideally hoped that they would have said, yeah, you're right. We got a bit carried away there.
Would have caught the one sympathetic general, or the one person in the staff that would listen.
I was quite an idealist. Yeah, I thought someone might give me a pat on the back and say, good on you for bringing this to light. But it never happened. And it wasn't until 2016, like 3 years after I'd been agitating internally. I was still in the military then. So I was still trying to make a go of it. I didn't have a huff and leave the military immediately. I was trying to, obviously the best way to reform an organisation is from within. And I wrote a number of sort of politely worded. In fact, I look back, because all of this stuff, all my complaints or whatever are a part of the evidence brief for the case. And I look back on them now, and I'm surprised how polite they all are and how well written. But I was trying really hard. I wrote to our equivalent of the Secretary of Defence, and yet for 3 years. And you could see it was actually a pretty sinister organisation, because all they'd do is they'd send my complaints back to the very people I was complaining about, basically to say, shut this guy up. They never took any action. They never admitted any fault. And so, yes, when I went to the press in 2016, I'd been trying for 3 years, and I'd been obsessed. That's all. Well, I'd been doing my day job, but I had pretty much been agitating for 3 years, and I'd got nowhere. So the idea that they were going to fix themselves if only I'd been patient is just ridiculous. They were not going to fix themselves. And someone who'd sworn an oath in front of the flag, and I was a military, you're rightly saying, a major for the Special Forces is a pretty senior guy, and you are obliged. They actually train you to say, just because you get a roadblock, and just because somebody says don't go there, don't look into that, that doesn't mean you stop. If you really think something's up, you're under an obligation to follow it to the end. And so I actually did exactly what I was trained to do. And under our laws, it's different in the US, I think, which is unfair, but under our laws, there is actually scope for you to go to the press if you've done what I've done, And in fact, it may be that it's the very first time I get to court, they actually decide that what I did was correct in that I tried the internal complaints, and then I went to the media only when I believed I was being fobbed off and the idea was being covered up. So that's right. That's why I think it is an extension. I am very much an establishment guy in that I do believe in the rule of law. Went to all the right schools and everything, and I tried to solve it internally. And as your readers, the world is in a pretty bad place because if you try to solve things internally, you don't necessarily get a good result. But I did, and then I went to a responsible media organisation. There's no question that national security was actually endangered. This was the equivalent of PBS, the sort of broadcaster that does a lot of sort of national security stories. So they didn't sort of send the documents to the Chinese or anything. They kept them fairly discreetly, and there's no question that there was any breach of national security. All they were trying to do was to shine a light on the questions that I was. And subsequently, they did a big war crimes inquiry, and they found that there was something like 39 murders, or no one's been convicted yet. But a guy did a very painstaking study, senior officer, and he said, basically, there are 39 things which look like they were cold-blooded murders of prisoners, and 19 of our special operations people are under investigation for murder. So it wasn't like I was making it up. I was totally vindicated, but it's almost like they don't want to have to admit that I was right, and they don't want anyone else to get the idea that you can question what they don't like. They'd be happy if I was just saying there were bad soldiers, they'd be okay with that. But because I'm saying there were not just bad soldiers, there were bad generals, that's something which hits home. And it looks like it's a bit of a revenge attempt to put me in jail. But I'm quite happy because I didn't believe I got... and Assange would be the same, and this is one of the good things about his case, is he didn't really get, any action was taken against the people like Hillary Clinton and all the hundreds of people that were exposed by his revelations. No action was taken against them, and the more that they try and put him in jail, the more people know that terrible things went on. And that's the same in my case. I didn't really no generals went to jail, no generals even lost their jobs as a result of my revelations. But if they try to put me on trial, and if they try to put me in jail, more and more people will know what I was originally trying to expose. And I'm happy for that. I mean, I'm happy to go to jail if it helps bring down the corruption in our Defence Force leadership and the complete lack of ethics and lack of direction that has happened over the last 20 years.
And that's definitely the second part of this I want to kind of hit on, with first part being your background and the second part kind of being the fallout of all of this, the ABC raids and everything that's kind of happened around that. I'd like to ask you about that. But kind of to start that off, what exactly kind of charges are they putting at you, and what kind of punishment do those charges bring, if that makes sense? Like what reality, if this goes as wrong as it possibly could, are you facing?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, there's good news and bad news in that. The good news is that unlike the US equivalents under the Espionage Act, there is a defence in that you can say I was justified in doing what I did because what I saw was so wrong. It's a pretty slim defence, and my lawyers don't seem to believe it's going to work out, but I believe it will, just on basic principles, to say, if your government is carrying out some sort of Holocaust and there's like shallow graves of 1,000 people out there, you cannot tell me that under any legal system that the person that tries to expose that is the real criminal. So I want that tested, although, people in the government, of course, try to say, oh, no, there's no excuse, no matter how bad. But, I don't believe that the government has a blank check to carry out crime. So at least there's a chance I can argue that. The bad news is they're all espionage type offences in that, the wording is oldie worldy stuff, giving away basically the secret plans to the defence of Australia, which of course entails huge sentences. In fact, I like to, in this sort of dick swinging competition, I secretly think it's quite funny that there is no upper limit to the prison sentence I could have. It's in sort of black humour way. There's usually 50 years or 20 years, but for endangering Australia's national security, the prosecutor had to admit he was quite embarrassed because I'm obviously not really a spy, but he was quite embarrassed to have to admit that the upper limit is 1,000 years. Who knows? There's no upper limit. If they still were allowed to execute people in Australia, that I could be executed. And I used to be a little bit worried about that. If you got the wrong judge, even though there'd be some sympathy, I could get about 20 or 30 years in jail, which obviously be the rest of my life. I'm in my 50s now. So that's quite scary. I've got 2 young kids, or teenagers now. They were young when it started. And so that is disconcerting. I mean, each day, that's why I love doing shows like this. The more support I get around the world, and I get a lot of support in all sorts of places, the less likely that becomes. I don't think I'm going to go to jail now, but it's certainly possible, and it's a high risk strategy. I want a trial. Some people don't want trials. I want a trial because a trial is the only way that the judge will say, well, why did you do what you did? And I get the chance to say, because A, B, C, D, we lied about war crimes, we lied about our gains, we lied about our allies, we lied about the drugs, and then hopefully that will get a chance, and that should get covered by the press. Of course, the government wants to have a secret trial, and they say national security, but none of these things are national security. If the government commits crime and the government is running drugs, or the government is covering up murders, that's not truly national security. It's nationally embarrassing, like in Julian Assange's case, but it's not truly national security. There may be a preliminary battle on that question about whether it's going to be an open trial. I mean, at least I'm lucky that I am allowed to speak to you, or no one. I haven't been arrested yet. I used to have stringent bail conditions, and there are very good people in the Australian judiciary system, thank God, because I used to have to report to the police twice a week, which and they arrested me once because I missed one day because I forgot about it, and even though I turned up the next day and said sorry, I was meant to report for bail yesterday, they chucked me straight in prison.
How long did they hold you for there? Or was it kind of just like a catch and release?
Because the magistrate let me out. And the next time I was in court, a good magistrate said, look, this is ridiculous. He's a middle-ranking officer. He's a lawyer. And it's a waste of the police's time, if nothing else, making this guy turn up twice a week. They took away my passport. I can't leave the country. And I'm obviously electronically monitored anyway. So...
And you live on an island, so it's not like you're going to casually walk into a different country or something. So it is absurd.
I was good. There was a good magistrate. I was really, my faith in the sort of justice system was restored because she said it's not right to have Mr. McBride report twice a week. So they dropped those conditions, but it was pretty onerous. And the police did grant me bail, but it would be tough. If I was locked away now, like Julian Assange is, it would be tough because all the strength I get is from people like you and your audience. And I wouldn't be able to go on without public support. I mean, I'm strong. I'm not that strong. And So yeah, if my message is to you and your viewers, if you can help whistleblowers like me just by saying hello, it goes a long way, and you actually become part of the whistleblower story. No whistleblower can do it without some sort of support. It may just be a small unit, but if you can get word to Julian Assange, I'm sure he hears about his support. But I know that would keep him going. It keeps me going. And I really do. I'm actually quite an optimist. I do think that there's a change in the air. I do think that there's more of us coming forward. I love to see some of the American, the US military people who've spoken out against what went on in Afghanistan and other veterans, because it's not about, the military is not bad per se, but it's been overtaken by career politicians who put their career ahead of their country. And that was one of the key points I tried to make, to say, when you swear on the Bible in front of the flag or the Quran, whatever it is, you're actually swearing to the country. You're not swearing to the government. And if the government starts doing things which are contrary to the national good, you've got to do something about it. And sometimes journalists will question me and say, well, who are you to say what the national good is? And it's like, well, I'm a lawyer. I'm an Oxford-educated lawyer, and I've been in the military all my life, so I'm not a bad expert, and I can tell you the things that are going to get people killed, things that are going to waste money unnecessarily, things that are actually going to make us less safe, they're not good for the country. And it wasn't as if there's any kind of like, it's a fine thing. We were deliberately doing some pretty bad stuff as part of government policy. And I mean, murdering villagers and saying it was all right. We saw a recent example in after the evacuation of Afghanistan, and then there was the bomb blast in Kabul, and then the US drone strike hit some innocent people, and then they tried to say, oh no, they were terrorists for quite a long time. Now that they got caught out because the winds of change had happened. We did that thousands of times, and Daniel Hale is one of my heroes. But if we killed a baby or a child, we would say, oh, they were a terrorist. There was one terrible time it came out in one of the Assange's things in Iraq, where they realised that they'd bombed the wrong house, and the commander made the decision to just drop more bombs on the house to destroy all the evidence. And that was one time they got caught doing that. But I don't know if it had been completely overtaken by bad people, but there were enough bad people in the organisation that good people like me needed to speak out to say, we are becoming, a criminal organisation who thinks nothing about killing people and lying about it. In that collateral murder video, which was obviously famous, but for a professional soldier or people like yourselves, a bit more discerning and insightful. The real problem with that was not the helicopter pilots who didn't really know what they were doing, but it was that the senior leadership then doctored the tape and went to Reuters and said, oh, look, it was all fine, knowing that it wasn't all fine. Now, people can make mistakes and you can have people down the chain, but once the organisation gets involved in putting out false information, then you've got some big problems. Then you're becoming the stuff like the Hollywood villains who are really, and that's what I'm aiming at, not the small guy, but the people up the chain who are doing things like, we've got a problem here, rather than just be honest about it, will lie more. And we see it, I think we see it domestically as well. And that's why I think my case is so important. It's not about Afghanistan, although it is, but it's really more about the state of society and the state of where we are going, and the idea that the government just makes stuff up The government is always right. Dissenters get put in jail. All these things we used to take for granted, the right to protest. We used to expect the truth in the media. These essential things are being eroded. And I'm fighting for the bigger picture rather than just a smaller picture. I'm fighting for the next war. I'm fighting for the people that get put in jail for protesting in America.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and that's why I consider your story so important, because the whistleblower stories are so hard because they've kind of set it up in this perfect way in the media, where if you go through, like, a lot of people have either forgotten about Assange or they think it's so hopeless that they don't care anymore. Daniel Hale can't really speak because he was locked up. So even when Assange was free in the Ecuadorian embassy, people didn't care, but now he's behind bars, so he can't speak to the public. And then you take people like Chelsea Manning, and Chelsea Manning, people look at that and they're like, well, she was free, so everything's great now, right? Like, we can just forget about all that. To where your story is very different, to where you're still staring down the barrel of this gun, and you can still talk about this, and you can talk about what the government's doing and how they are treating you and everything like that while it's happening, instead of after the fact or anything like that.
I'm lucky.
And I definitely wanted to.
That's right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, it's a good point. But it's good for me it's good that you verbalize that, because I forget that. I've got a platform now. And as I said, if some people are agitating for the charges to be dropped, and not that I would complain, but yeah, I'd lose my platform then. And there are more important things at stake than my own liberty. And so in some ways, yes, I'm lucky. And then as you said, I don't fall into any of those categories. I am someone from within the system. I can't be painted as someone who is just anti the government, as Assange can be sometimes, even though that's not true. But I mean, he can be painted as a hacker, and for a lot of middle of the road people. But I was a uniform wearing guy who still believes in the democratic nations, English speaking nations. I'm very much part of that tradition. And I'm able to speak before I go to trial, and that's important.
Yeah, and definitely the one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because this part I'm not familiar about it at all. I just heard it brought up a couple times. What was the situation in Australia with the raids on the ABC headquarters and how they went after the journalists there and everything like that? Because that's definitely a part of all of this, and that's something I had no idea even happened, and I'm in this universe. So
yeah, no, it's a good thing, and it's funny. It's funny how the world works, and you can always look at the glass half empty and woe is me, but I always try to smile. But that was actually a stroke of good luck for me. I'd already been on trial I'd already been charged. I'd been released on bail, but no one was that interested in me. The conservative press ran one story on it, and because the first thing I was charged with was theft of, a bit like Daniel Hale, theft of, but it wasn't theft of any sort of classified information. It was theft of paper. And I think it was a tactical ploy by the government. They were hoping I'd plead guilty to it, because it would have been effectively a slap on the wrist, because it wasn't actually theft of information. It was theft of A4 pieces of paper, which I'd taken out of the military. And they were hoping that I'd plead guilty to it, but they're probably quite surprised that I said, no, I'm going to run this trial. And then they put 5 more really serious charges on me. But still nobody cared. And I kind of looked like I was a sort of a bad guy. The conservative press was sort of, as they do with most whistleblowers, they paint you as sort of like a misgruntled employee or something. And then they did the raids on the ABC. And I have a feeling they were just doing them for show. There were 2 raids. One of them on a journalist in an unrelated story. And they made the mistake, the police made the mistake, because she worked for Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. And then they raided the people that ran my story, the ABC, the next day. And I think it was really just a show of force, because when they raided my house the year before, they took all the files. I didn't destroy anything because I believed that destruction of the files was an act of a guilty person, and I kept them because I thought they would vindicate me, because I thought, well, what happens if I try to say, well, the government's corrupt and the government was covering up war crimes, etc., and yet I don't have anything to prove it. So I wanted to keep them. And at first I was angry with myself because I thought, oh my God, how stupid were you not to destroy them? But then I thought, no, I'm glad, because your story is that you were justified, and it's good that you kept the evidence. But yeah, after the raid, so I don't know nobody really knows what they were looking for in the ABC. There's all sorts of theories, but the press covered that. And even though it's pretty funny, the media didn't really care about me going to jail for life. But once the media were threatened, they were all up in arms. In fact, I was so grateful that they went through the other journalists' underwear drawer, because that became the salacious headline, which caught everybody's attention. And then my phone did not stop ringing.
That's so surreal that's the salacious headline, because what do they think the police do when they go into someone's home? Of course they're going to.
I know, it's pretty funny, isn't it? I feel sorry for the police, like they're not allowed to go in the underwear drawer.
Right, that's where I'd be hiding everything then.
That's where I'd be hiding the drugs,
Right. So real quick. So what was it, kind of just like a normal sort of benign thing, like they showed up with a couple officers with a warrant and kind of just went in, or did they go like way overboard with that police?
No, I think it was the normal thing. It's funny, the media painted it like it was some sort of terrible storm trip, but I used to, because the same police were dealing with me, and they used to turn up to court, and I liked them. They interviewed me, and they were very pleasant. And we used to always joke about it, because I used to joke that they suddenly became more famous than me, because their pictures were kind of all over the TV carrying out. And I think the media made a big deal of it. Some journalist live tweeted, "Oh my God, the cops are here, in our offices right now," and it became a huge deal. But what the media don't know is that that's the reality of life for so many people across the government. It wasn't really any different. No one got beat up or anything like that. But when the police come to look for evidence of crime, that's just what they do. And as far as I know, that there was no impropriety. Eventually, I think one of the search warrants was overturned on a technicality, because the media service had a very good, top-notch lawyers, and they threw a lot of money in it. But it wasn't really. It wasn't some sort of. The only reason was that the wrong person had signed it. It wasn't like it was a really overstepping of the law. They just got it signed by the wrong person. And so, yeah, I think it was kind of funny for the media to paint it as being any kind of draconian thing. Had there really been any truly national security concerns, it would have been the right thing for the police to do, to look into it. But it backfired for them. And this is what really helped in my case. I mean, I complained about the media, but it was really good. But America's a bit the same. The media is very, it's owned by only a couple of organisations, and so two major organisations in Australia, and together with the government broadcaster, they banded together and had something called Your Right to Know, and they started protesting against the government together, and that's never happens, where the sort of rival media organisations get together like a union and say, we're going to protest this. And they did a very hard-hitting protest, where one day all the major newspapers just had black front covers, blacked out black, like it had been redacted, saying, the government's got to stop trying to keep things secret. And that was a really good thing for me. It wasn't directly related to my case, but obviously it made people think, wow, all the media organisations are unhappy about this. And And then we saw the journalists that ran my story were investigated and they were going to be charged. And again, we saw blatant hypocrisy about how the government works, because you can't really put me in jail and not the journalists who actually ran the story, because it doesn't make any sense. If I've committed a crime because what I did was endanger national security, the journalists that actually ran it have committed more of a crime because they actually put it out there, whereas I only talked to one person. But because they fear, modern politicians fear journalists, after a lot of pressure, they decided to drop the charges against the journalists without really explaining why the journalists, are here. But the good thing for me is that they actually made a statement. The government made a statement and said, "Oh, the story was in the public interest, therefore we're not going to punish the journalists." But that can only help me.
I would say if I was your lawyer, I would be printing that off on a giant banner and holding it up in the back of the courthouse.
Yeah, they're going to have to struggle to say, "Oh, well, the journalists, were in the public interest, but David McBride wasn't." I mean, that doesn't. And some of the media organisations pointed this out. They said, "Well, we can only do public interest journalism if we have sources, and you can't if you just keep putting the sources in jail. Obviously, there's not going to be any stories." It did. I'm a soldier, and obviously, you face worse things than jail as a soldier. So I'm kind of like, bring it on. But it did scare journalists. They don't sign up to go to jail, maybe for a short period of time. But I've heard on the grapevine that a lot of potential whistleblowers have since not wanted to go ahead, and a lot of journalists are very wary about taking on stories now. So the government got their way in that they did scare people about doing stories, and so that's unfortunate. And that's important for me to put a brave face on it and to keep laughing and smiling, because I want to make sure that other people aren't too scared to come forward, because we need people to come forward. And that'd be the ideal thing, because obviously they can't prosecute everybody, and everybody should be leaking as much as they possibly can if they see crime, because that will be the equivalent of sort of Mahatma Gandhi's sort of peaceful, non-violent protesting. It'll be hard for the government to do much about it. But of course, people are scared, and who wants to face a lifetime in prison? And that's why the cases are all important, because if one of us gets up and we all help each other, we can maybe turn the tide. That's why I was so happy to see Daniel Hale and hear him say, I'm proud of what I did, basically, and I believe I did the right thing, and he was unashamed about it, standing up in court. I thought that was brilliant. I thought good on you, mate, and that helps me, and I hope that me standing up and saying yes, I did it, and I'm proud of it, helps someone else, which in turn helps someone else. As whistleblowers, we need to, stand firm and own our conduct and say, we felt justified because we believe the government broke the law. Maybe they didn't, but we are taught to stand up and do what's right. And if everybody does that, the world will be a good place. And if everybody doesn't do that, the world, that's how we get totalitarian regimes.
Yeah, and that's definitely the important thing for a lot of people to understand is a lot of what they do is these kind of holding actions. It sounds like it's what they're doing with you, of pushing the trial back and back forever. It's the same thing they did with Assange, with just kind of delaying this whole process, because they want people to break before they get to court. They want people to be unable to stand for themselves. They don't want things to go to trial. They just want these problems to go away. And if they have to deal with these problems, they want your arrest to be as far away from your conviction as possible, so it gets out of the news story. And you're seeing that kind of increasingly in the United States with activists, where they'll arrest them give them what do they call essentially like a public danger order, to where they're too dangerous to be released to the public, or what they did was too sensitive for them to be released to the public. They'll make them sit in jail for 8 months after the story and the headlines have run through and everything. And then they'll finally go to trial, and it'll get thrown out of trial because it was nonsense. They were charged for something that didn't matter or whatever. But that makes every single activist or whistleblower in your case have to look at that and be like, okay, I will win this, but I'm going to have to go through this giant trench of pain and losing things and suffering to win it. And that dissuades people. And it's that's why I really like what you're saying of not only being very vocal and committed to fighting it, but also being positive about it and being hopeful about it. So people don't look at this as just this death march, because it's not always the case.
You've got to keep a smile on your face, and that's why, as I said, it's really important to speak to people like you, and Slow News Day, and they make me laugh, because you've got to laugh at it. You got to treat it like you're, I love that, the partisan song, from Money Heist, and you've got to treat it like you're partisans fighting a war, and kind of sing as you go into battle. And that's the only way to deal with it. I read a very disturbing story in the Dissenter magazine about, just like what you said, an American guy who's an ex-serviceman, I think, who was complaining in his local council about. In fact, I think he was another drone whistleblower, but he wasn't complaining about that. He was complaining about there was some corruption in the local council. And for the mayoral elections or something, the local corporation owned the town.
Right.
Anyway, someone made a complaint about him. He went to the local council meeting and said, "Oh, look, this is really bad." Somebody backed by the corporation said that he was a danger and that he was likely to go and shoot people up. And the next thing he knows, he's kind of in jail on some sort of preventative case for being, a dangerous mental case.
Extreme protection order for people who want to know. Yeah, that's what they're called now.
Really hard, and he had to fight that. He eventually got out, but all because they wanted to shut him up about some sort of nuclear waste being put into the local river or something. And it was pretty disturbing. I thought, bloody hell, that is bad.
Yeah, we had a story like that similar here in Michigan, where local county sheriffs, essentially the county had shut down a landfill because it was leaking into people's groundwater and people were drinking sewage. So they shut it down, but the state demanded that they reopened it. The county refused to, and it actually ended up coming to the point where there was an armed standoff between state police and county police, which was an absurd thing. So it's like, these kind of things happen all the time. And of course, all of those men had to go to jail. They had to explain themselves of why they did this, and they were eventually proven correct. But after the media had run their name through the mud, after their livelihoods and their employment may have been messed with and all of that, but they did win. But then again, the media also will never talk about the part where you win. That will be the least detailed kind of thing. So that's why it's important that, definitely if you do go to trial and you do come out of it, I think it's just as important to have a giant home run tour for you as it is to talk about it leading up to it.
That's what I try to say to supporters. We're going to have a party. Yeah, we need to paint it like a military victory, and we're not going to go quietly, and we're going to take the fight to other people. Yeah, we need to treat it like that, a party, a victory. I love the sort of the sporting analogy, the military analogy, because that's the way we need to do it. Yeah, I read about the same. The guy lost all his money, having to defend it. He had to do some sort of a public support. His mother was a single mom, and she was working in the local Walmart or something in order to pay the fees. It's a pretty terrible story, and. But we have to paint this as a victory, and we're going to have a big party. And I say that we're going to have a big party in Bondi Beach, and we're going to, we're going to celebrate, which I love, because and go around encouraging other people who are doing the same thing. As I said, that's why it's just water in the desert to speak to you, because I was alone for a long time. All I wanted was a bit of publicity. As I said, I don't want any sympathy, really. This is something that I've wanted. I've walked into this knowingly. I knew this would happen. I always knew this would happen. When the reporters first spoke to me, they said, "Are you happy to go public on this?" And I was like, "Hell yeah! I want to go public on it because I believe I believe in it so strongly." And they said, "You might go to jail." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't mind, because it's my duty to do something about this." And if that's the only way it's going to happen, because obviously when you see whistleblowers and their faces all blacked out and they're talking with voice changes or whatever, it's not that convincing. But when you see a real person, the whites of their eyes, and they're saying, "Yeah, I believe I'm right, I'm prepared to go to jail on this issue," it's much more hard hitting.
Yes, humanizing. It makes you realize what's going on.
Exactly. I'm a real person. I've got kids. As I said, I've always done the right thing. I don't have any kind of criminal record, and I'm prepared to take a stand on this. But as I said, we can only do it when I've got people that are going to listen, because it's very easy for the government. They have huge media departments. It's very easy for them to demonize you. And there's a few cases running at once, and we don't get that much. I get it. I've got a fair bit of publicity, but there are other people who don't really get any publicity at all. And when you ask why, the journalists go, "Oh, well, I'm scared of covering that case. I might get arrested." And that's not actually true. But they just don't want to take the risk, or the head of the corporation has said, "You are not to cover that story." My lawyers paid for photographers to go and cover another whistleblowing case because the papers wouldn't do it. And we took the photos of the guy leaving court and we sent them to the newspapers and said, "Look, here's the story done for you."
Right, just copy and paste it, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. We had to go to that length because they were like, "Oh, no, we might get arrested if we cover that case." And we're like, "No, you won't. And if you really don't want to do it, we'll cover it for you, So, but yeah, you've got to keep fighting the fight because it's so important. If people are listening, it's fantastic. It just makes your day.
Absolutely. And I'm glad. And that's why, as soon as I was on that panel with you the other day, I'm like, I have to have this guy on. And I promised you I would get you in front of more of the people over in the US that are kind of in the indie media sphere and get them on. So definitely sending them this episode. You need to be talked about more, especially because everyone's focused on COVID and everything right now. And that makes sense. But this, especially if you're talking about Australia, what you experience is the Australian government. And like you said, you're blowing the whistle on how the government is working right now in our society. Yeah, so that'll apply to literally any issue, so
it does. And it's good to speak to you guys because there's so much psychology involved in this. And if you say that it's rife, if you say to the average journalist or whatever, this is a big issue. It's not just about a few murders in Afghanistan. It pervades all areas of the government. They just switch off. They don't want to know about anything which is so big. But your audience is good because you can get. It is about COVID. If you think the government, they obviously don't just lie about Afghanistan. They could get away with it. It was a long way away. But we lie about COVID. We lie about. And the media, you can manipulate the narrative. What I find very scary in Australia at the moment is how anybody who's a dissenter about COVID is totally demonized. Is totally, we're not far away from taking people that don't believe the government line, putting them in concentration camps and killing them. It is so one-sided, the narrative, and you are so completely, laughed at, plagiarized, humiliated, arrested if you'd say it. And that concerns me. And it's not necessarily about, the facts, but it concerns me that the government can do that. And they can run one-sided campaigns which get blanket support on any one issue. And if you think it's going to stop, public health, or in Afghanistan. It's not. It affects every issue. What they've managed to do is they get the key. It's like the perfect storm, that famous book. But you've got major media outlets controlled by a couple of people. They are money-making organisations, and so the government can buy them by saying, right, you don't have to pay any tax, or we'll do some very favourable tax deal. But in return for that, you will run very favourable coverage for us. What the government is able to do in Australia and in America as well, we probably copied it. They're able to put the key heads of government departments, they can hire and fire them. So they put in people who will only do what they want. And they are able to put anyone who dissents, like me, in jail. So they have learned a lot of bad lessons, probably starting in Vietnam, where they got fingers burnt, but they've started to learn what they did wrong there. And that's not, they don't consider going into an unwinnable war in the Southeast Asian country is wrong. They consider getting caught out by the media. So now they've learned better to control the media. They've learned better how to buy the media. They've learned better how to control dissenters, and they've learned better how to make sure that everyone in the government departments is singing from the same song sheet. We've learned a lot of very bad lessons, and it affects everything. It affects the environment. As I said, while war crimes are important and war crimes grab people's attentions, it's not really about war crimes. It's more about bullshit. It's the war on bullshit in that so much of what we are told about any issue is bullshit, and it's politically motivated. It's to make you think something, to do something which is not actually right. Our conservative government here, they run, as with your conservative governments, they run on a platform of national security, they run on a platform of fiscal responsibility, etc. All things which are nothing wrong with that. I was in conservative politics myself, but the problem is that that's not what they actually do. Their policies don't make us more secure, and they know that. Their policies are not fiscally responsible. That's just a brand that they put out there, whereas the opposite, it's like Enron, as I said, they're not really doing the things that they claim to do. And there is so much manipulation. In fact, there seems to have democracy has been short-circuited, where we used to try to do things which we thought were good, fiscal responsibility, going to war with our enemies, and we would try to spin it as best we can. But now we've realised that, well, sometimes you can do things which you think are good for the economy, but they're not popular and you get voted out. We'll stop doing things which we think are good, and we'll just do messages. We'll just do messages. What about doing good stuff? We'll just put all our effort into messages which say we are doing good stuff, because at the end of the day, it's a democracy and people vote on what they think. So if we can just manipulate what people think, that's as good as actually running the country. And that's effectively what we've got now, where all the effort goes into messaging rather than actually doing good things, which, who knows, people might not like them. So, and that's a real problem, because the messaging, there's no adult supervision as to what the messaging is. And unless we start speaking out, we are going to be living, well, I think in many ways we already are in a very dystopian world, but it's certainly going to get worse. So what I'm trying to do is reverse that trajectory, where we start having minimum standards of honesty, minimum standards of ethics in government departments, and we don't stand for something which is just really a shallow political message aiming to make you put a tick in a box for a certain guy, which has no connection to reality at all.
Absolutely. And that's definitely something I say all the time to people. And I think it's really important that it'll never get easier to stand up than it is now. It's only going to get harder to stand up if we continue down this path. It's only going to get worse. I see a lot of people kind of say, the more accelerationist types or just the apathetic types of, well, we just, we got to wait until the government oversteps so harshly that everybody will understand. And by that point, there won't be David McBrides because those people won't.
It'll be
you know.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. I'm going to quote you on that because I do like it. And that's right. You know, people, and it was hard to get that across with Julian Assange. Some people said it to say, well, you might not personally like him, but I mean, if they can put him in jail, they can put any publisher in jail, they can put any journalist in jail. You know, and good people on Twitter pointed that out when they said, when they said QAnon, and I think even Glenn Greenwald made a very good point when he left the Intercept because he wasn't allowed to publish anything about Hunter Biden's laptop, and that is concerning when there are certain things that you're not allowed to say because that will only get worse. And who decides that? And it's the same in Australia. You know, you get totally censored if you say I don't want the vaccine, and even if it's only your own personal choice, which you're allowed to make in just about anything. I mean, if you really want to cut your own leg off, you're allowed, but you're not allowed to in that case. And it's only going to get worse. And people don't seem to see the big picture. They only think, oh well, I really don't agree with that person, so I don't mind if they're censored. They don't seem to realise that that's, you know, next year, if we just do things, whatever's politically flavour of the week, you know, this week, next week, it might be you that is being censored. It might be your children that are going to jail on some trumped up charges. And then you're going to be upset about it. And we need to value principles more than sort of whatever's fashionable. As I said, we had a laugh the other day, but some of our biggest problems, some of our most sort of fascist sort of actions at the moment in Australia are being carried out by progressives who, as I said, are the ones with the pitchforks and the hunting out anybody that sort of that doesn't agree with them, and not realising that by doing that and by not allowing people to have different opinions, you're actually playing into the hands of sort of some very bad things that are going to happen down the track. I mean, Adolf Hitler used that, and he used fear of the communists and, beat up the communists, and then they suddenly killed them all. And but of course, if he could kill all the communists in Germany, well, he could start killing other groups as well. And so it's important that we don't buy into demonization of people that have different. And that's, I'm glad I finally remembered. I love your idea of your show is unity or death, because this is one of the things that struck me about, because I'm coming late into activism, but we need to kind of trade unionize and get together. I mean, this war will be won by alliances, not by splinter groups. And we as activists, we realize we've got more in common fighting the sort of narrative than we do our differences. And I love the idea of the fact that, you might be a slightly different flavour of activists, but it's really all about bullshit. And if we're fighting the government's misinformation, we need to join together rather than say, oh, well, they're left or they're right, and therefore we can never work with them. What I hope to do after my case, if it goes well, I'm not in jail, but is to join you on that fight to try to get united activism from different flavours to say we all need to work together to ensure truth. And as long as we find out the truth, we can make informed decisions, but we can't make informed decisions on anything if we're not actually hearing the truth. There'll always be spin, that's fine, but there's a difference between spin, and we've crossed that line, and things which are completely made up and have no basis in fact. And it's a huge difference. It's a real difference between having a sort of difficult but upwardly progressing world and a world which is downwardly progressing. And that's one of the things that made me jump from being a soldier to a whistleblower, as I saw we had crossed that line where we were no longer spinning the fact. We were facting the spin, as I said, in that we made up like the war in Iraq was like that. We decided we wanted to invade Iraq. That's quite clear, and people in the military have told me that there was plans to invade Iraq in 2002, long before the movement of mass destruction thing became a thing. And then we look for facts, isolated facts, which bolster the case we've already made up our minds we're going to do.
Right. It's that old kind of adage we've had in the activist community forever of problem, reaction, solution, where they manufacture the problem or figure out what they want to do, then they create their own reaction, then they offer the solution to their own problem that they created. And that definitely in the Middle East, that's a common thing.
And that affects us all. Yeah, that's the real enemy. It's not any one thing. It's not really just climate. It's not war crimes. It's not police brutality. It's not any one thing. But you're right. It's that. It's the method that the governments are using to deal with any issue now, and it is exactly that. Yeah, it is manipulating public opinion in order to carry out some much bigger nefarious purpose and getting away with it, and that's a real problem.
Yes, and I think that's a perfect thing to end on. We usually go an hour, but before we tune out, a lot of people asked me about this when I brought up this story, because a lot of people were shocked about it. How can they help you out besides just spreading the word? Because I know that's really important. Where can people find you? And is there any kind of like other stories or things you think people should be paying attention to, or just, anything like that?
I've got a GoFundMe, which really helps, and every dollar helps. It's called 50 years in jail for whistleblowing on the Australian Defence Force. But just spreading the word is good. If you can, retweet stuff. I'm on Twitter. Murdoch Cadell is my handle. But if you just put Captain Major David McBride, I've got a website, davidmcbride.com. Sorry, .com.au, David for Australia, .com, right. davidmcbride.com.au. That's got a lot of my information on it. And I've also got a YouTube channel, David McBride Trial. But I'd love support. I'd love, it's such a big place in America, so it'd be great, any support. And I'm also very happy to do any shows. So if you know anybody, it doesn't matter how small, I get a very good reaction from shows like this. And thank you. Just say hello, because it can be lonely sometimes. And I've enjoyed meeting you, hearing about you, and likewise, I follow you now. And we can help each other. Together we are strong.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's been an honor having you on. Like I said, this is the first time we're meeting, so you don't know too much of my background. But my whole thing of rising to prominence has been pushing people to do what you're doing, of standing up and taking action, to get into the streets, to blow the whistle, to go on strike, whatever, tools you have, whatever situation you have in, and trying to incentivize and motivate people to move. And then I learned about your story, and I'm like, hey, here's literally somebody who's embodying this perfectly and showing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm always enthused by the Vietnam War, in that it was people power that ended that, and that it shows it can be done. And I take my hat off the Americans, and you think of movies like The Trial of the Chicago 7, it can be quite inspirational, and as I said, small things are good. You do whatever you can. And if the way I did it myself is you can't really complain about the big picture. You're not going to go very far if you say, well, the world is fucked, whatever. But you can, in your organisation, you can get far. If you're meant to follow some ordinance, procedure, law, and you're not doing it, make a stand on, if you're putting waste into the river, or you're throwing paper out, or whatever it is, and you're responsible for that, make a stand on it. Because often from small things, big things come. And if we all start making a stand, because quite often, we don't follow the small stuff, and it's the small stuff where we can get a result. I first started saying, we are not following the law. We're not following our own procedures. And they will never be able to prove that being wrong. Obviously I was complaining about the bigger things. I was a bit like the sort of the train guard on the Holocaust who's complaining about the fact that you can't put people in carriages made for animals according to the train regulation. What he's really saying is, he's complaining about the death camps, but you complain about whatever regulation you can complain about. And if it's your scope to say, only animals go in cartons for animals, and do it. Because we need to start enforcing. There's plenty of laws there which help, but we just need to make sure that they're enforced. And do whatever you can. Protest in any capacity is good, because we've got more in common than we do differences.
Absolutely, that's 100% my language. I love it. Thank you for everybody's tuned in. We got decent amount of people here tonight, and like I said, I'm going to reach out to a lot of my friends in kind of indie media and everything, and be like, talk to this guy. This is really important. Probably could elucidate many subjects, and I know a lot of people are curious about Australia right now. So talk to an Australian. So it'll be perfect. But thank you so much for coming on, David, and thank you everybody that tuned in. I will see you all next week. Kind of have a secret little plan with that. Just like this was a surprise. I kind of sprung this on everybody. So we'll definitely look forward to that. And tomorrow I'm going to be on the Assange vigil with Rose McGowan, with a bunch of other people, and definitely going to be talking about Assange and everything, and David's story and Daniel Hale and all the madness that's going on in the world right now. So once again,
give Rose McGowan my regards. I spoke with her on another panel. I thought she was great.
Oh yeah, she's awesome. But thank you, everybody. You have a wonderful night. Thank you, David, for coming on. Have a good one.
Thank you.